Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller back again with you, and a guest who's been with us numerous times over the last decade or so. Always a pleasure to have Mike Burbach. And Mike is Vice President and Editor of the St. Paul Pioneer Press, a lifelong journalist, and just an interesting individual with some nice perspectives. Mike, welcome back.
Thank you, Alan. I'm glad to be here.
And we were talking a little bit before we went on air about the pressures on print media today. And I know you have felt those pressures also. So let's talk about that, because there's an article in today's New York Times about having to cut down staffs on the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and they mentioned a couple of others there. Now, I know you've gone through those pains also, so how has it changed?
Well, so the key thing affecting the business model of newspapers is the change in print advertising. Somewhere back around 2000 or 2001, newspaper advertising peaked at about $62 billion in the U.S. It's now down somewhere between 10 and 20 billion. And we've done a lot, all newspapers have done a lot to adjust to the marketplace. It's a very competitive marketplace. The internet, which I like to think of, the digital revolution, which I like to think of as an explosion of freedom, blew up our business model, and we've had to adjust. And some of that has been, frustrating, and some of it has been really interesting and good.
How does that work with your advertisers, though?
Well, they have advertisers, as the digital world develops, they have many choices and more ways to home in on the particular customers they're looking for. And so we've had to adapt in that way too. We're a digital operation and a print operation, and they both matter. And so we're constantly working to figure out how to compete in that atmosphere.
With a smaller staff?
Yes.
Now, is your digital staff separate from your print staff?
No, not in news. It's all integrated. The way that I think about it, the way that we think about it is we're in the local news business primarily, and we have different media for delivering that news. We've got print, we've got digital, we've got social. Social is part of digital. The website, we've got social. But to us, our product is news, and we have to figure out how to gather it and deliver it and distribute it efficiently and get paid for it. And the getting paid for it is the part of it, is the hard part, because of the extremely competitive environment that the internet brought upon us. For good, overall for good, but it's challenging for us.
Some not so good.
Yeah.
There are some people who rely on anything that they see online and take it as the gospel. And there's a lot of misinformation out there.
There is.
And
There is.
You have to be intelligent enough to discern the difference, or curious enough to do some investigation, or you can really, really get misled.
Yes, true. I don't know if you've ever, looked up medical symptoms on the web, but you have a whole lot of diseases at one time, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's true, and I have.
Yeah, me too.
So now the Pioneer Press is in a new office now, though. You've moved your offices.
Yeah, we have.
So let's talk about that.
We'd been in downtown St. Paul forever, and last November, about not quite a year ago, we moved right across the river from downtown into a building at 10 River Park Plaza. It's that tiered glass building that also includes Comcast and several other businesses. We're now up on the 7th floor of that. We have some space on the ground floor too. It's a really great place. You miss downtown a lot, but we're only that far away from it. We're just across the river from downtown. It's a really great place. We have one of the most beautiful views of the river and downtown anywhere. My office looks out over the St. Paul Airport, so I get to see the comings and goings at a distance of lots of planes.
Knowing you, I don't think you spend a lot of time looking out your window.
No, but when I do, it's nice to see things happening.
Now, not a lot of cities, or in our case, Twin Cities, have been able to maintain more than one newspaper.
Correct.
And here we have the Star Tribune and the Pioneer Press.
Yes.
You have seemed to have stabilized your print subscription group or customers. Even went up a little bit a couple of years ago, as I recall. But that's got to be a constant challenge also.
Oh, it is. It very much is for every newspaper in the country. The Twin Cities are really a remarkable place. You look at some of the statistics and they'll indicate that this is the number one place in the country for newspaper readership. People are literate, they're interested, they're civically engaged, and they're paying attention, and that's why we still have two good-sized newspapers, as well as some good, strong TV stations, radio, lots of smaller print publications. It's quite a good place to be in the news business, even in these challenging times.
And they are challenging times.
They are.
As a matter of fact, we can talk about distribution and we can talk about printing, because I know that you have now teamed up in some respect with the competition. How does that work?
Well, we hired the Star Tribune to print the Pioneer Press a couple years back. Our press was getting a little older and they had excess capacity, and so it made sense for them and it made sense for us to make a deal whereby they print us, and it works pretty well. There are hiccups now and then, as there were before, but it works pretty darn well.
And distribution to customers?
Yes, so we deliver the Star Tribune in some places in our area, and the Star Tribune delivers the Pioneer Press in some places in their area. It's more efficient that way, and actually, I'd say better for the environment too, because then you got one car going up and down the street instead of two.
Well, that's true. And sort of friendly enemies in that regard?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I notice every once in a while, for instance, a well-known writer or columnist will jump from one paper to the other. Does that have any repercussions?
Well, that has changed a good bit in recent years. It used to happen more often when both staffs were much larger and there was more hiring going on. It happens occasionally now, but not very often anymore. And I wouldn't call it repercussions as much as, no, I wouldn't call it repercussions. You know, we're all trying to gather the news and tell the news as best we can.
I was thinking of Rachel Stossenberger.
Yep. Rachel came back to the Pioneer Press.
She had been there
little more than
originally.
a year.
had
She had
not?
been there.
Yeah.
Yep. It was nice to get Rachel back.
So, we are in a crazy election period. And although I know you're not going to, because you told me earlier, you're not going to make a presidential endorsement.
Correct.
You have endorsed certain candidates in certain races. Explain, and I know you've done it before, but to our viewers, how that works.
Well, on the opinion page, we offer our opinion on a variety of things, almost entirely local, and that includes certain political races. For the state legislature, for the Ramsey County Commission, in a couple of the congressional races that are distinct to us, that are in our area. And the way that we approach this is to think that, number one, we're interested in the candidates, and I got to tell you, it's been a crazy election year on the national front, but here in Minnesota, it's really been a breath of fresh air to spend time with our candidates. They are really good.
That's
They're all
nice
really
to
good.
hear.
It's wonderful. I gotta be honest about that. They are, we made choices in a few races, but they could have gone the other way too. They're good candidates. So our approach is we're interested in what they all have to say. We believe in, the marketplace of ideas and checks and balances and participatory democracy here in our republic. We believe in all that, and so we're interested in what the candidates have to say. And when we make a pick, we always give a nod to the one who we didn't pick as well, because we think that our opinion is just another piece of information for people. There will be people who read it and say, okay, so I'm going to vote the other way. There will be people who say, okay, that helps me understand, why I was favoring this person. But for us, it's just another piece of information. We really believe in the marketplace of ideas, and varying perspectives are important. And that's how we go into it, with a lot of respect for the people who are running as well.
So, and you show that in your endorsements, which, as I looked at them, have been pretty close to 50-50 in terms of DFL and GOP.
Yep, that's true. And I would say that the Pioneer Press traditionally has looked at it race by race, candidate by candidate, and always had a mix, almost always had a mix.
So you decide you want to delve deeper into a certain area, state senate, whatever it happens to be. You invite the candidates to come in for interviews. And who is the interviewing team, and how does that work?
So in recent years, we've invited on the local races, the legislature, county commission, city council, we've invited Democrats and Republicans to come in together, or independents to come in together. And so we do the interview with them together. Often it's Pat Effenberger and I. Sometimes Guy Gilmore joins us, who's the publisher. Sometimes Greg Mazanik joins us, who's the associate publisher. And we find it interesting to see how the candidates interact with each other.
I think that's
very useful.
Almost like a Chamber of Commerce forum or something like that. That's very interesting, because traditionally I think most candidates come in by themselves in other media, and they don't have to share the limelight and or opinions. Does that get testy at times?
Occasionally it does, but we assert at the beginning that it's conversation. We don't play gotcha in these interviews. We're really curious about where they're coming from and why, and we don't encourage a debate. It's not a debate, we tell folks. We want to hear from you. And it does occasionally get testy, but very rarely is it unduly testy. It's constructive testy. and the candidates sometimes will challenge each other, but it's not a debate, and we keep the conversation going. They've been really good.
Good.
Yeah.
It makes for, I find, interesting journalism. I always liked the idea that newspapers, which are really an organ of communication, could render judgment and make suggestions. And there were some papers chose not to do that, but I think it's very helpful to the readers, and sometimes to get their bile up.
Right. Yep. Sometimes it does, and understandably. I mean, as I've said to some people who challenge our endorsements, every decision like this is arguable. They're all debatable. Reasonable people, good and reasonable people, can come to different conclusions and do. And I just think that our readers and people in general are plenty smart enough to make up their own minds, and this is another piece of information. We don't presume that ours is the only voice of reason, or that the way we see it is the way it should be seen. It's just another piece of information. And we're curious and interested, and we care.
Now, there was a time when the editorial pages and the opinion columns were pretty much homegrown. That's something that maybe, except for the New York Times and one or two others, is a thing of the past. So how do you decide which services that you use and which columnists you want to pick up and present?
Well, one of the things that you look for as you're deciding what to publish on the opinion pages is what voices would be particularly useful in this ecosphere. And we pick a variety. It leans more center-right. Our opinion pages lean more center-right, at least in terms of the syndicated columnists we use. But I like to pick a variety, and one of the things that I like best, I say this to people, local people who are submitting an op-ed, a guest column of some sort, said the best ones leave you thinking, well, I did not know that, and I hadn't thought about it that way. That's useful. Maybe they persuade, maybe they don't, but the best ones make you think, hadn't thought about it that way before. Glad I did.
And for instance, you have one columnist who appears reasonably frequently from St. Louis, and as soon as I see his name, I know I'm going to start getting my blood up. Being far to the left of that gentleman.
Of that columnist.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I have, on occasion, responded to some of his columns, and
I try to pick the ones that are reasoned. We don't run opinion columnists merely for sensation. I like people who are going to reason their way to a conclusion, whether I agree with it or anybody else agrees with it or not. If you have a steady diet of one thing, you're not going to be too healthy. And I like people who challenge the way that we think, that they themselves think. And that it's useful.
Reasonably liberal. I'm to the left of Lenin, let's face it. But I can't just watch MSNBC, although it reinforces my own personal philosophy. But I will also watch Fox News to see how the other side is thinking.
Yep.
And in fact, I was on last night. I really enjoyed Megyn Kelly's program last night. Who did she have on for a guest? Michael Moore.
I saw that, yeah.
And it was an interesting interview. And, I think that's what rounds us better as human beings.
It's also so much more interesting, If everybody's sitting around the table saying the same thing and nodding their heads at each other, that's not only not good for us, it's boring as heck. How do you discover anything that way if everybody's sitting there nodding their heads at each other? And so I look for people who help us work our head muscles, and it's all debatable.
there is not necessarily a lot of working those head muscles in our society anymore. People seem to be so partisan and so divided. Certainly look at the presidential election. And the Trump people, according to the last what I've seen in the papers the last few days, will not accept the fact that he may lose. And he may not lose, personally that makes me nervous, but I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I was not initially a Hillary supporter. So you have those own battles going on within yourself, and it's got to be tough for the papers to try to present that so that you give a little bit of
It
both
is.
sides.
People get dug in and certain sometimes in these election years. The pitch is higher. There's more anger. You get angrier phone calls, undue, I think, in a lot of cases. But passion for who's going to run the government, passion for how it's going to work. That's a good thing. This is not supposed to be neat and clean and somber. It's supposed to be difficult and challenging and raucous and not that easy to get things done. That's the joy of the system. I mean, it's part of the check and balance of the whole thing. So I know that there's lots of evidence of polarization and lots of evidence of people shutting out all kinds of opinions, but I don't buy the idea that that's the mainstream or that that's predominant. There's lots of it, but
I hope that you're right. I think that you probably are, and that's really a nice belief to fall back on. But in an entirely different area, St. Paul is a different city than it was 5 years ago. How has the rebirth of St. Paul, is what I call it, affected the Pioneer Press?
There's a lot going on in St. Paul. Lower Town, if you haven't been down there, has boomed. It's really interesting. You go down there in the evening and there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening in other places in town too. The east side is coming back in very interesting ways. Of course, University Avenue, and pieces of that are developing slowly. There's the potential for the likelihood of a new Major League Soccer stadium coming to the Midway. There's a lot of news for one thing, and a lot more going on, and we're happy to be chasing it and trying to tell it. That's how it mostly affects us.
In the last year, we've had executives on this show from both the Saints and the Wild, on the other side of the river from the Twins. But and I find that interesting. We got over to a Saints game. We toured the XL Center not too long ago with one of the Wild execs. Haven't been there for a game in quite a while, but it's really interesting and fascinating to see how these things are changing. The old West Publishing building coming down, which became a jail, coming down, and so much in terms of residential property going up there.
There is. I hear a lot of people say how much they like the new Saints ballpark. And it fills up, and people are having a good time.
Very interesting place, really nice.
Yep, and the XL's a great place for hockey. People love hockey there. There's a lot of really interesting things going on. It's fun.
Both teams, the Saints had a really good season.
They did.
And looks like the Wild could be on the cusp of a very good season.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And the Lynx will be playing in St. Paul.
Oh, is that right?
Yep, they're going to be playing there for a year or two, I think.
That's probably the best team in the Twin Cities consistently. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I felt badly for them this year.
Yeah, that was too bad.
In that last minute and a half with a blown call that could have just
that was too bad.
Changed the championship. But
the Lynx are champs.
Yes, they are. And so we have that growth. We have other things that are happening. Apparently the Wild are going to build a practice facility in what used to be the Macy's building.
Sounds that way.
Macy's went out, and it's another area. We have another theater coming in right opposite Park Square. Speaking of people who have been guests on this show, that's going to be more for musicals, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
The Palace.
Yeah.
The remodeling of the Palace, yep.
Costs exceeding anticipation, but what doesn't? And
True.
Yeah. So,
Yep, it's a lively and good place. Lots of variety in St. Paul.
and of course, a lot of politicians opposed the Green Line. As years ago, I had Tim Pawlenty here before he was governor opposing the Blue Line. And then he became governor. And the Blue Line, which has become a tremendous success, I was for it from the beginning. He got to cut the ribbon. I wasn't even invited. That really hurt.
Yes.
But the Green Line certainly is adding to the prominence of St. Paul in terms of really its rebirth.
Yeah, I think the Green Line is doing better than projected in terms of ridership. The debate about transit is a very good debate, though, because the Green Line was also very expensive. There are trade-offs with any of these choices we make, and I think that it's good that they all get fully vetted. Then you know what the choices are, because everything's a choice.
Well, I see that the signals from the control room say that we've practically used up our time already, but what do you see as the function of the press in today's society?
Well, I think that it is at its core the same function as we always have had, which is contribute to the marketplace of ideas in a way that includes news, watchdog news, paying attention to where our public money goes, what the decisions are. I think that we can, as we always have been, I think, we can be useful in reflecting the variety of human experience that goes on in our communities. We're in the local news business primarily, and the challenge for all of us is to figure out a business model that works. And we are pretty doggone determined about it. The New York Times article you showed me, the headline on it is something like "Gloomy Days in Newsrooms." And I don't buy the gloominess. It is a challenge. The facts are the facts. We are smaller. But my position is every minute we spend feeling gloomy is a minute we didn't spend going to get the news and trying to affect our own destiny.
So we've been talking with Mike Burbach, Vice President and Editor of the St. Paul Pioneer Press. A level approach to newspapers, and I've really enjoyed it. You come back again soon, I hope, and share with us some more.
Thank you,
A
Alan.
newsman's newsman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.